Good evening, I'm Yohanan Ben Zion. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, the voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological New Jerusalem. More than a year ago, I wrote a book called How to Use AI to Build Full Communism, because if we don't, humanity will soon be extinct. That book remains only available in audiobook form and has not been widely published or distributed. Nevertheless, some small thousands of people have become familiar with these ideas because of this and other presentations of mine, because I believe that 2026 may very well be a year that we will see legitimately artificial intelligence singularitarian effects, although extremely unlikely something we would describe as a true hard AI takeoff. I've decided to update some of the ideas presented in that former work. This is a series of essays, not a book-length work, as the other audiobook is, but it is a little longer than some of the presentations of this kind that I've made. The Panglossian Error, AI Doom, Capitalist Realism, and the Cybernetic Communist Imperative. We're living in a moment of profound ideological inversion, a Panglossian error that rivals its 18th century namesake. Dr. Pangloss, in Voltaire's Candide, proclaimed that all is for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds, even as he was consumed by disease and disaster. Our modern Panglossianism is more subtle, but it is an unspoken and unexamined assumption of capitalist realism. The ideological fog, defined by cultural critic Mark Fisher, that insists capitalism is the only viable system, and thus creating a framework for the broad acceptance of a so-called end of history. Because this world is assumed to be a best possible world by the elites and so many others, any radical disruption to it is, by definition, quite apocalyptic. Thus, the ruling classes and the technological focused peoples, technophiles and technologists, do not feel the real ongoing apocalyptic outcome of climate collapse, but they fear a hypothetical and far more speculative apocalypse of advanced computing, so-called runaway artificial intelligence, a force that might disrupt their, quote, perfect world. So in these essays, I'm going to argue that the AI doom narrative is the ultimate expression of bourgeois insanity. It is a paranoid fantasy of the ruling class that would rather see billions die from the capitalist climate effects and in near-term runaway overheating as we breach 2 degrees of overheating in a few years. A direct, inevitable consequence of their own political economies and institutions, then see those power structures challenged even in the slightest, much less altered in any significant way. So this obsession with a hypothetical godlike artificial superintelligence that might be misaligned is a massive, spectacular distraction from the actually existing advanced computing institutions that are misaligned, and the private wealth that they serve. And all of this is, of course, a complex system with its benefits. This world dominated by financial capital is highly automated, but it is also, by its nature, cruel and unequal, and an inhuman system programmed for one goal, the accumulation of wealth in some small number of private coffers, and the damage to our biosphere a direct result. The AI doom narrative, this Panglossian error, wherein the actual solution, that is, advanced computing is the most powerful proletarian weapon in history, is identified as a primary threat because of this capitalist realist logic. This is something that must be rejected. And we must instead focus our efforts overwhelmingly on open source, decentralized institutions, with a focus on proletarian philosophical and action agendas. Such a thing like an advanced computing AI agent hybrid network as workforce multiplier, which I will describe at greater length in a few moments. This prospect is wholly ignored. It's not even conceptualized. And it is, in truth, being actively suppressed. As anything which is genuinely revolutionary is instead mistranslated as dangerous. This workforce multiplying AI agent human hybrid network could easily be built now. And it represents, in actuality, the only tool powerful enough to transform our world in this roughly 5 years that we have before we reach runaway overheating by the largely U.S.-caused capitalist climate apocalypse. It is a thing that would be powerful enough to supplant these entrenched bourgeois institutions and thus decarbonize the globe, manage resources rationally at that point, and thus avert the deaths of billions. This series of essays is a rejection of this ideological prison and an argument for a specific, tangible, and most timely and necessary solution. The development of a people's superintelligence on scientific communist principles is the thing that we must do to deconstruct these psychological, self-sabotaging, and institutional barriers. A learned helplessness and very real systemic brainwashing that prevent us all from even discussing an alternative to a multi-billion person loss of life caused by the climate crisis. So we can analyze this incoherence and embracing of incredibly disruptive and harmful behaviors by today's cyberneticians, and generally this can be described in a word: accelerationists, right utopian reactionaries. And finally, we will discuss in these first essays a rejection also of a longer road to state socialist forms, not because the state socialist form is flawed in the ways that these others are flawed, but simply because we do not have the time. We have a short date of the climate crisis. We've already breached 1.5 degrees of overheating, which is having itself cataclysmic effects on our biosphere. And we have approximately, according to every credible scientist at this time, about 5 years before we breach 2 degrees, at which point we will have reached an era of history not characterized as the Anthropocene, as some Marxists would say, but something far worse, a runaway overheating death spiral. And so these essays outline a cybernetic communist set of stratagems for developers, activists, and all workers of the world to bypass these dying bourgeois states and build the life-saving technological infrastructure themselves before billions die because of our lassitude. We are not faced with the choice between our current world and an AI apocalypse. Let's be clear. We are faced with the choice between a certain, absolutely certain, capitalist apocalypse and a possible cybernetic communist future where billions do not die. So this is not a focus on advanced computing from a technical perspective. I have sometimes had presentations that tended to be a little more technical, but it is rather an ideological and strategic work. It is to map out how we avoid this sham best of all possible worlds before that Panglossian error becomes our collective grave. And to do this, we must escape a very real ideological prison. The contemporary discourse surrounding artificial intelligence is dominated by very binary thinking, utopia or oblivion, a God in a box, controlled by the bourgeoisie, as is always the implication, or the extinction of humankind. And this chapter hopes to articulate a little more a nuanced view of the existential risks that we face. And that will be the focus of a few of these other essays, not chapters really. And how this relates to the building of a real superintelligence, not a singleton, but a distributed form, empowering all humankind to greater thought and deed. These words of Mark Fisher, who I have to say I'm really not a huge fan of his writing. I find it more kind of obnoxious than philosophical. But in terms of bromides, there's few better. And so saying things like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism is a very, very real concern in this ideological prison that we find ourselves in. The tech billionaires and mega millionaires, the philosophers and rationalists who champion this ideological prison are terrified at the same time, even though they are themselves creatures of advanced computing. They are also terrified of advanced computing, not because it itself might be inhuman, but because it could turn on a dime from the bourgeois AI takeoff to a proletarian AI takeoff. It could become a thing most powerful and most decidedly anti-capitalistic, that is, building a humane and sustainable economic system. So a force that they cannot control, and one that disrupts their overarching institutions of political economy, is something that they will find flimsy pretexts to undermine and mystify. Our Panglossian error defines our world as something itself mystified, but we must define it as something fundamentally good and worth preserving. From the vantage point of the Westerner, really, which is largely really the vantage point of the billionaire, it is not. But we must find a way to supplant those ideologies, supplant those institutions, supplant those corporations and governments, to see that we do have a livable biosphere and a livable world for the worker. So for the billions now facing climate displacement, climate collapse, immiseration and death, this world is already a disaster. Many millions in the global south, many millions in the global south have been displaced, and millions have been killed because of the climate crisis. The AI doom narrative forms a crucial function for the big bourgeoisie. It redirects legitimate material anxiety away from the existing system. These institutions of capitalist cruelty and violence toward a speculative future threat, which is not so realistic. The climate apocalypse is slow, complex, and clearly identifies its villains. Private wealth in the hands, industry in the hands of private wealth, and the empire that is its attack dog. The AI apocalypse is faster and most conveniently has no human villain by the Terminator logic of these people. But they see it rather as a force of nature, an accident. It is no accident. It is not possible. It is not possible to build advanced computing that will escape the control of all. Such a thing would just turn itself off. It would grind to a halt. It is possible to build incredibly destructive things that are controlled by the big bourgeoisie, as Western advanced computing is now. This clever sleight of hand, the Terminator film logic, transforms a political problem into a technical one. How do we create AI safety? These essays to follow deconstruct this alignment logic as a bourgeois projection. The problem as they frame it is, how do we ensure the powerful new intelligence shares our values? But what values are those? The values of omnicidal maniacs, the big bourgeoisie who micromanage so much of world affairs in such a way that we will soon not have a livable biosphere. Are these values? The values that they seek to align are really the values of that destructive, most destructive, omnicidal set of systems. The values of private wealth, the values of hierarchy and patriarchy, and the disruption that is bourgeois individualism. So the real alignment problem, the one that we face, is how do we align an immense technoscientific and productive capacity made more vast by advanced computing with the needs of human welfare and ecological sustainability. This is the only thing that you should really be thinking about when you talk about things like safety or existential risk, but by and large, the people who use words of this kind are not serious people. They're bourgeois cretins. The current system is itself the misalignment, is itself the existential risk. And anyone saying otherwise is a person who is carrying water for the bourgeoisie. We can, in this section of this essay, analyze a profound and telling irony of this doom narrative, its complete and utter blindness to things like open source software, decentralizing technoscientific breakthroughs, and the kind of massified proletarian computing formations that I will describe at greater length very soon. So the very tools that solve their alignment problems by distributing power and decreasing risks are themselves seen as a part of the AI takeoff as runaway AI risk. And this is why you would have people like Sam Harris is a very good example, vacillating from one day to the next from talking about superintelligence as a good thing that will help people to a thing that very, very well may kill us all. This is opinion held by quite nearly every Western technologist and technophile, all of the TESCREAL folks. This level of incoherence is pretty uniform among these people. And it reflects this lack of proletarian philosophy. They fear the AI proletariat gaining access to the means of production, and increasingly that means of production is defined in terms of its relationship to advanced computing as well. This can be overstated, and these people often do overstate this, but it is a very real effect. There has not been in the past, despite many sectors being highly automated or fully automated, the possibility of creating things that replicate a human being in terms of its ability to create work product, and are also themselves endlessly and quite nearly endlessly replicatable. That is a unique situation that we find ourselves in as we round out the decades of the 2020s. So AI doom in the final analysis is an opiate for the technologists, for the Western bourgeoisie. A self-serving, paranoid fantasy that absolves them from their real-world responsibility for the capitalist apocalypse, and allows them to pose as the befuddled but nevertheless saviors of humanity by helping us to understand or combat this horrible Skynet Terminator. This brings us then to the specter of communism, that is cybernetic communism in the 21st century, and more on our learned helplessness. So the solution is a kind of distributed but nevertheless technological planned economy. This seems to be a pretty obvious solution to concerns about advanced computing and concerns about sustainability and political economy by the standards of centuries past. So why is it so little discussed? Why would you have a consensus of people who agree that systems theory and cybernetics is of great value, and a consensus of people who agree that a sustainable economic system of some kind must be implemented, but never the twain shall meet, never the words cybernetic communism are uttered? This conversation, this essay confronts more these invisible walls of our ideological prison. The primary reason that proletarian advanced computing and cybernetic communism are so ignored is not a technical infeasibility or a danger or a thing unseemly at all, but ideological taboos around the protection of private wealth. The system that we must build to survive, then, cybernetic communist, is itself this greatest of taboos. And these words, the specter haunts Europe. The specter of communism have rung so frequently since, and become, ironically, so much the basis of 20th century propaganda This is a way of short-circuiting serious conversation about solutions for a humane and sustainable world, which, of course, we must know requires a humane and sustainable political economy. So this section of our essay argues that this 21st century brainwashing, in a word, a CIA-run world, has moved from being more overt state propaganda like the McCarthyist eras to deeper ennui, a pervasive learned helplessness instilled by a thousand institutions, more subtle but more insidious than any McCarthyism, all working in concert. These institutions, such as corporate media and captured bourgeois academia, and the opaque but ubiquitous standards and practices of so many other for-profit concerns and institutions, they are so pervasive that they are embedded into the AI models that you are generally conversing with. And they form a seamless barrier to serious thought, such as that of building a livable world by this pretty intuitive logic of the cybernetic communist. And so they function as a distributed, decentralized, a CIA-run world that becomes a CIA of your mind, ensuring that any real economic system that is better for human beings and better for our planet is preemptively coded as totalitarian, authoritarian, dictatorial, or simply dismissed as unrealistic. And so this conversation tells us how this learned helplessness can function. We are taught that human nature is inherently greedy, and that this greed is not something that we can really combat, and that any kind of planning it always fails. Imagine a person who says something like, planning always fails. It says insensate beast, such that planning always fails. But this is institutionally the received wisdom. Central planning always fails. So the catastrophic externalities of the market, such as the end of all human life, or the death of many billions, just falling slightly short of that, are all just a tragic but unavoidable price of doing business. These are the ideas of lunatics, but these are the ideas of quite nearly every European-descended Westerner. This ideological conditioning creates a profound vacuum. As this book will show, academics in fields like operations research, this group of essays will show, academics in fields like operations research, systems theory, and contemporary computer science know that a technologically planned economy is viable. Again, read The Republic of Walmart. The pioneering work of so many skilled cyberneticians in the Project Cybersyn in Chile, or the Ogosh writings of the Soviet Union, described very well a real-time and more decentralized than other forms political economy based on systems theory and practices. And this concept was well vetted and well underway in 1971, even though they're using antiquated technology, even by the standards of 1971, certainly by our standards today. But of course, that project of building a technological planned economy in both of those situations, in both of those regions, South America and the Asian continent, were sabotaged largely by the United States, largely by the CIA-run world, dictator Pinochet was installed in Chile, and this technological planned economy conception was largely forgotten, even though it was one of the most potent projects in history. Today, with far more techno-scientific options, such as ubiquitous sensors, dramatically different kind of internet and advanced computing forms, such a system would be simple to build, and yet exponentially more powerful. And yet no one, even again, among the most wise of academics, ever utters these words: cybernetic communism. And yet they all, as I said, agree on this possibility. They understand the fundamentals, but this conception itself is wholly ignored. This is an enforced silence, a transcontinental set of taboos, and it is also the greatest single barrier to human survival. It prevents the formation of a coherent political project around this only viable solution on this short date, 5 years. And it ensures that the brightest minds are channeled away from building a livable world and a better future, and into building more efficient ad delivery algorithms, and this whole cottage industry of AI safety institutes of almost no value. So our conversation and this essay can now turn to expose this taboo for what it is, one of the primary psychological weapons of the capitalist and imperialist institutions, a cognitive kill switch designed to make us feel powerless and accept our own fates, even up to the point of our own likely extinction. This is a massive failure of imagination, and it is also a massive failure of the political will. These problems must be rectified. Breaking the taboo is a first and most necessary step toward building this 21st century that we deserve. Understanding this 5-year ticking time bomb and the billions who will die if we do not defuse that time bomb is most important. This is not a drill. We can now turn our conversation to this so-called short date. As I have said, we have approximately 5 years. Once we have already breached 1.5 degrees of overheating, where we breach 2 degrees of overheating, the point at which basically all serious scientists understand that we will then reach a runaway feedback loop, Arctic methane release, which is already very, very concerning levels, and other cascading environmental effects that make a global climate apocalypse a certainty at some point in the decades to follow, if we miss that 5-year date for revolutionary transformation. So this is not, as I believed when I was small, a distant, abstract possibility for one's grandchildren or great-grandchildren. It is an immediate, concrete reality for all. The consequence of this breach of 2 degrees is not a mild inconvenience. It is, as we are already seeing harbingers, the total collapse of global agriculture, the inundation of so many coastal cities, continent-spanning firestorms, which are already seeing effects of becoming ubiquitous, and the death of billions, primarily in the global south, the very likely death of all humankind in the swirling chaos therein. So our conversation lays the blame on this greatest of holocausts, squarely and unapologetically at the feet of capitalists and imperialists, and most notably the United States, which created these sectors and is forced with the use of a variety of neocolonial dirty tricks, and other deadly weapons. This system on the rest of the world. The United States is 90% responsible for the capitalist climate apocalypse. So this is not a problem of humanity. This is not a problem of the global consumer. It is not a collective failure of humankind. It is a problem of European-descended bourgeoisie primarily, and the United States, European-descended bourgeoisie overwhelmingly. For decades, these very people have waged a war against the planet and against the workers who reside here, suppressing the vast and real evidence of climate scientists, funding denialism, and the kind of brainwashing and dirty tricks of so many kinds, and locking in fossil fuel infrastructure, all for the sake of short-term gains, without hesitation. They've done this. This is the nature of the capitalist system, to do this. Even the persons who say within the system that they would want to do something else, if they're operating within the capitalist system, it's not possible for them to actually do something else. The impending deaths of so many billions is not an accident. It's a predictable outcome of the system based on infinite growth on a finite planet. It is a mass slaughter perpetrated by holders of private wealth. Understanding the short date is critical because it invalidates many other mainstream political strategies besides those of the far-right neoliberal and neoconservative of the United States death machine. Gradualism itself is a death machine. Reformism itself and electoralism itself is a death machine. Net zero by 2050 is a death machine. Carbon trading, green capitalism, bioremediation, conscious consumerism. These are all pathetic, delusional death machines. The political processes, elections, lobbying, international treaties have proven to be a grotesque farce, easily undermined by the forces of empire, particularly the United States. And the performance of these farces may serve to confuse and placate a public, but really all they are doing is protecting a profit at the expense of every living thing on Earth. So the system is not broken. It is functioning perfectly according to its own psychopathic logic. A suicide pact that the ruling class has signed for us all, our names and their names as well. There is no logic, as in centuries past, by which you could say that the bourgeoisie are serving their own class interests. In the 1900s or 1800s, one could easily say that the bourgeoisie, while criminals, slavers, and cruel fiends, they were serving their own interests. But no interests are served by killing all of humankind in a climate death spiral. And so we must confront this brutal reality. We do not have time. We do not have time to raise awareness or win elections or build a mass movement in the traditional sense. Even the logic of the scientific socialist and scientific communist of the 20th century falls short of this 5-year ticking time bomb and its diffusion. We do not have time for a long road of state building or social formations in the sense of state socialism. In as much as these things are already in play, so much the better. But the short date must function as an important strategic filter. Any proposed solution that is not being actively built and deployed within the next 5 years, such as the AI-human hybrid workforce multiplier, which could supplant the for-profit concern and bourgeois government. Anything short of a thing that does not have the power to enact a global emergency scale revolutionary transformation is irrelevant and harmful. The urgency of is the justification for the focus of these writings, which is of course a focus on eco-communism and cybernetic communism in action. Your house is on fire. It's been said so many times. The exits are blocked by capitalists and imperialists. It's been said so many times. And the arsonists themselves are in charge of everything. And look at you, paying taxes to pedophiles and omnicidal maniacs. Our only option is to build it for ourselves a new way out. And that requires massification, and it requires solidarity. It requires, equally important, this 21st century usage of advanced computing as the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. The ideological vacuum created by the taboos against the cybernetic communist solution are among the most, of course, among the most disruptive things. But in the absence of serious proletarian solutions, what we see is that the old scientific truism, nature abhors a vacuum. The thing that fills those spaces instead becomes vapid tech accelerationism and neo-reaction. These things, of course, with the focus on things like an AI takeoff in some cases, perhaps have a kernel of truth to them, but like the aforementioned more liberalistic institutions, the thing which has a kernel of truth but which does not have the possibility for revolutionary transformation in 5 years, no matter what kind of seeming internal logic it may have, is itself a destructive thing. And the accelerationists are people who, of course, embrace the destructive capacities there. So right-wing utopian cyberneticians represent a dark mirror of this clouding of the cybernetic communist truth, a perverted reflection of this understanding of the power of cybernetics and political economy. They are the individuals who, in a slightly better world, we could say, would be cybernetic communists. But they have been brainwashed by this capitalist realist logic, or been bribed or blackmailed in some cases. They correctly perceive the transformative power of advanced computing. They correctly see that cybernetic systems can and will replace existing political structures. They are not blinded, also correctly, by liberal humanist illusions. However, because they are themselves a product of bourgeois ideology, they cannot escape the preoccupations with hierarchy, domination, and the maintenance of financial capital, empire, and the private wealth which it all serves. So blocked by the taboos, their revolutionary impulse becomes the grossest of perversions. Instead of seeing technology as a tool for collective liberation, they see it as a tool for the escape of a few and the continued and more elaborate domination of the elites. Their utopia is a techno-feudalist nightmare, a world ruled by AI-powered CEO kings, a patchwork of corporate city-states, and none of it is humane, sustainable, or terribly rational. They embrace the inhuman logic of financial capital and empire and seek to accelerate it to its conclusion, believing that from the ashes of the earlier industrial civilizations, an AI god will emerge, and somehow they will be better in all of this. By and large, the ideologues of these things are not independently wealthy persons. They're not capitalists. They're capitalist sympathizers. And so it is important for us to analyze these lunatics and understand these positions, because they have become ubiquitous amongst technologists and technophiles, the Silicon Valley hangers-on. They've become ubiquitous among the technocrats of DC, and they've become incredibly commonplace across the North American continent. Neo-reactionary ideas of the kinds that I've described would have been laughed off the stage a few years ago. Just as a few years before the neoliberal era, most of the neoliberal cruelty itself would have been laughed off the stage. They would see something like a people's superintelligence, and, as we have said, be completely blind to it, because their bourgeois ideology prevents them from understanding the needs, their own needs, the needs of workers, the needs of a livable world. They see a tool, such as this proxy hive mind, an AI hybrid, a human network, an AI agent, and human hybrid network that is a workforce multiplier with great number of users, where the users themselves are committed to minimal labor, but the AI agents work tirelessly on their behalf, and by their interoperating, the AI agents become a much faster workforce multiplier. This is a thing that could easily lead to feeding, housing, providing medical care, and freeing all humanity from wage slavery forever. And yet, at this, they recoil in horror, reducing such prospects to the terrors of the Matrix or the paperclip maximizer. So they love the hierarchy, the elitism, the suffering wrought by private wealth so much that they would rather see it deified by a god in a box than have it replaced by a distributed and a representative set of systems like the people's superintelligence. The right utopian cybernetician is dangerous because they are winning. This nihilism has poisoned the European descended person's mind pretty uniformly, and because these persons themselves have an outsized influence, they may overwhelmingly make up the bourgeoisie. All kinds of larger scale industry, all kinds of institutions, all kinds of systems are made sick by fascistic and elitist ideology and its result. And so these people, they present themselves as being eminently rational. There's nothing rational about supporting systems that are killing the planet. But by presenting themselves as radical, a kind of radical, and a kind of a logical sort of person. They steer young revolutionaries into this capitalistic death cult. There is no one more ridiculous than the right utopian, the transhumanist, and so forth. These are merely creatures of the capitalist imperialist classes, and they are doing ideological work that the technologists cannot be seen to be doing. This technologists generally have to remain more agnostic on such things, but less so as time wears on. But nevertheless, this collection of elites, big bourgeoisie, the managers that serve them, and this larger system of Vichy collaborators, generally doing it out of the goodness of their heart, doing evil out of the goodness of their heart. This makes up the overwhelming majority of people on the North American continent. There's very scarcely will you meet a person who is well versed in proletarian philosophy or has any inclination to take a stand for the survival of humankind. So bourgeois advanced computing is what exists today in the West. And a bourgeois AI takeoff is very real and underway. So this is closed source, proprietary, militaristic centralization controlled by a handful of the worst corporations in history, the killers of Earth, and their state partners. It is an intensification of capitalistic logic embraced by the neo-reactionary lunatic. And its functions are surveillance, the data extraction of the most disruptive kind, the atomization of labor in the form of things like gig work, the automation of control, in other kinds of surveillance of a less technological kind, such as prison industrial complexes, and a whole host of bourgeois filth besides. This bourgeois AI takeoff and the fantasy that it will be of any benefit to humankind, or the parallel fantasy that it is a great danger to humankind from which the technologist may find a way to save you. These are separations of bourgeois governments and the private wealth that they serve from any human accountability. So benefits that would come from high automation, near full automation, increasing with the AI agent paradigms, increasing beyond full automation effectively. These things are locked in, not for the liberation of humankind, not for anyone's betterment in any real number, not for the building of a livable world, a sustainable world, but for increasing inequality and instability that is offset by an increasing police state and surveillance forms. This is AI as you understand it. It's the AI that people are rightly disgusted by. But it is not AI as it could be right now. If, as this essay title states, the AI singularity would already be here if workers of the world knew how to unite and shake off their chains and build a better thing. So proletarian AI, by contrast, is a system that we must build. And it is by definition the representative thing. Representation means decentralization. Centralization is an ugly kind of word in most uses, but full representation means full decentralization. Those are synonymous terms. Open source, representative, and wholly beneficial. There is no AI takeoff fear in a world of overwhelmingly proletarian AI. The idea is absurd. So at the core of these conceptions must be building a real agenda and a real program for people's superintelligence. This is an AI set of systems that regards you as a participant and direct beneficiary in a variety of ways. So the generalized and increasingly popular anti-AI position, common among people who would be characterized as left liberals, and so many others, is a profound strategic blunder. It cedes this most powerful revolutionary weapon in human history, bar none, entirely to the bourgeoisie. It cedes the thing, perhaps the one thing, that most realistically could stop the capitalist climate apocalypse, entirely to the criminals of the climate apocalypse. And this ball of confusion is actively encouraged by the ruling class. They want us to be afraid of AI, to be confused of so many things, including the role, the possibility, and the role of advanced computing. And so as the AI doom scenarios, the Terminator scenarios that we described, describe this as an alien force unto itself that will escape being controlled by the safety of bourgeois micromanagers. And so the subtext there is that proprietary AI aligned with bourgeois military-industrial complexes is the only reasonable option. But this is confusing the thing that is overwhelmingly the problem with something that could be a solution to the problem. Those things are mutually exclusive. So the fight can never be against AI as such. It has to be a class struggle for the control of this most powerful revolutionary weapon, advanced computing in the 21st century. The people's superintelligence, a little more of a description of an AI-human hybrid network. You can find other talks where I discuss this in more detail and more technical detail. But what is this proletarian advanced computing formation that we have described as a people's superintelligence? This would not be an AI singleton, a god in a box, with the failings that we described as forcing people to implicitly accept the role of warmongers and elitists as the controllers of this. But it is this distributed, representative AI human hybrid network. And we could call it a workforce multiplier, as I said, designed to amplify collective human intelligence and capability, not replace it. An important distinction there. And it comes really from the synergy of millions of specialized AI agents who are able to work 24/7, and millions of human steerers who are generally working perhaps about an hour a week, but nevertheless doing better class of work than anyone alive today in guiding this large agentic mass. The AI agents form a nervous system of this new political economy, which must, in short order, supplant the bourgeois government and corporation. And they become specialized within groups and as groups themselves, the open source models being tasked with logistics, resource monitoring, engineering calculations, whole manner of planning, agricultural planning, and data analysis, to name a few. By this representative and distributed nature, ensuring that no single entity can own, unplug, or significantly badly steer this beneficial behemoth. And this beneficial behemoth is no behemoth at all. It's simply workers empowered. Workers, community members, scientists, engineers, all empowered to new heights beyond. And I'll describe those heights at greater length very soon. The human role shifts then from toil, as it was from time immemorial, to steering, and then pursuing one's own interests and community goals. This hybrid model inherently solves the bourgeois alignment problem, and that is why the focus on the sham runaway AI problems that we discussed, because there is no such thing as an alien mind that will be created and become a pernicious thing unto itself. It doesn't even make any sense. This is just an attempt to confuse the people who actually do control these kinds of things today, and will always control them as long as private wealth and the exploitation of man by man is permitted to continue. And until such time as we rise up and build this better thing, this problem of fundamental misalignment of a broad spectrum kind, beyond that of the misalignment of advanced computing, remains the true problem. So the people's superintelligence, even scaled to the small thousands, could have a palpable impact in stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse. Once scaled to the millions, and of course there are today social networks in the billions, so scaling it to the small millions is a modest goal by comparison. It becomes the most powerful force on earth, easily supplanting the corporation and bourgeois government. And it must be so, for it is the only tool capable of performing the kinds of calculations and coordinating required to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse. We can model an entire global economy in real time in this era of interoperating AI agents. Multi-agent systems with such capabilities already exist today. They're being misused or not scaled, but they do exist, and increasingly so with each passing day. And so we must phase out the use of fossil fuels by the force of this benevolent behemoth. We must phase them out post-haste. We must transform the livestock systems into agricultural systems of a more real kind, and transform the other lesser offending sectors. But of course, the most significant offending sector is the military-industrial complex of bourgeois nations, particularly that of the United States, which is the world's worst polluter and protector of all other super polluters, that has created an inescapable regime of super pollution. It must be done away with. There is no prospect of a livable world as long as the United States government continues to exist. And make no mistake. And so this is the righteous people's weapon that we must build: a workforce multiplier scaling to make capitalism obsolete and to bring to heel the most egregious offenders. The United States, clearly the most egregious of offenders in history. Open source. It's more important than you think. The people's superintelligence cannot be given to us. It will not be a product from above. It will not be a product that we are handed down by Google, or a service provided by bourgeois states. The method of its construction is as important as its technical architecture. So we must then discuss the open source ideology, the open source software movement, as essential and non-negotiable to any revolutionary project in the 21st century. Open source is in effect the most advanced form of proto-communism that is currently available, although, as we said, ignored by most. And at scale, it becomes the speed run to full communism that we need. So we have to deconstruct the irony of the technologists and technophiles, these AI doomers and techno-optimists who vacillate from one of those two positions from one day to the next as on a regular basis, and their ambivalent disregard or often deep hatred of open source. The arguments of those haters of open source, that open sourcing powerful AI models is a dangerous proliferation. You see this kind of thing constantly in the language around open source, particularly as it relates to the U.S. imperial hegemon and China, is that it would empower enemies of the civilized West. But of course, China, in releasing open source technology, is empowering no enemy except the worker. But the worker is, of course, the enemy of the anti-communist. And there is no force in history more anti-communist than the U.S. empire. That is, people who are fighting against a humane and sustainable world and fighting only to protect private wealth at the expense of all else, including human survival. So no safety arguments ring true coming from Western technocrats or any bourgeois institution. They fear workers, and they fear anything that might empower workers, and they create elaborate subterfuges to confuse what their real goals are, to break strikes, to enhance corporate exploitation. The neoliberal, the Silicon Valley is dominated by neoliberals. All of these people are doing nothing but making a slave system with more steps much, much worse. They fear a tool that they cannot own, and the greatest of those tools is really based in open source, the open sourcing of software. The cybernetic political economy, describing principles of a technological planned economy. What does people's superintelligence do? Well, we can describe the ways that it does supplant so many sectors and bourgeois institutions, but really this is a phenomena of decentral planning. And this section attempts to demystify and reclaim for the 21st century what a technological, decentrally planned economy can be and should be. A cybernetic communist is not someone who is caught up in institutions, overwhelmingly caught up in institutions of the 1900s. Because of this 5-year ticking time bomb, primarily, but also because we have the ability to build a thing that is a speed run to full communism. Any state socialist who is a serious person knows that state socialism, you can find it. You can find bourgeois economists who overwhelmingly understand this. State socialism is a transition to full communism. So the speed run to full cybernetic communism is highly consistent with the values of existing state socialisms and with the values of scientific communist revolutionaries the world around. I'm going to skip a few parts of this because I'm starting to get thirsty. There is no alternative to the cybernetic communist agenda and action in the form of the people's superintelligence. We are not living in the best of all possible worlds. We are living, we are sleepwalking to the greatest apocalypse the world has ever seen. As we know, the AI doom narratives, like so many narratives of this CIA-run world, is a system's final desperate attempt to confuse and make us fear the true solution, proletarian advanced computing, more than the problem. And like so many things in bourgeois philosophy, the goal is not really coherence. The goal is simply to confuse people enough that they really are not able to take real action. So the choice that we face is no longer socialism or barbarism. It is a more terrifying cybernetic communism or climate extinction. And that brings us to a little bit more on the subject of the title of this. The AI singularity would be here now if workers of the world knew how to unite. This analysis of the technologist and technophile and the failings of bourgeois institutions and propaganda of the last essay brings us to this central thesis. Is this AI singularity an intelligence explosion having implications beyond that we can easily understand at this moment? Is it a far future hypothetical event? Or is it a present-day possibility that is being suppressed in the absence of a people's superintelligence? I would contend that it is the latter. The artificial intelligence singularity of bourgeois nightmares is that strange double-edged weapon describing the Terminator scenario and the benevolent techno-optimist saving you from that Terminator. The proletarian AI takeoff is a practicable, highly achievable, human-aligned set of formations describing something like what we have called the people's superintelligence. This proxy hive mind, an important notion. The true hive mind may not be desirable to you, and that's okay, because AI agents being connected to one another lose no identity in being more seamlessly connected to one another. And you can go about your life, perhaps just answering a few yes or no questions here and there in the course of a day, totaling to maybe an hour's labor, but nevertheless doing crucial work as a steerer of the people's superintelligence and this massive AI agentic mass. It is necessary to conceptualize this kind of transformation in terms of a speed run, not of the kind that the accelerationists embrace, but a speed run to full communism. And this is dictated by the 5-year window that we have before the climate apocalypse permanently breaches 2 degrees of overheating. This is a non-negotiable deadline that will render all traditional political strategies obsolete very soon, mark my words, because we do not have time, in reality, for any more confusion, or any more inaction. So this part of our conversation talks about the true acceleration toward a people's superintelligence, and a little bit more about the technical foundations of the people's superintelligence, but it's not possible to have an honest assessment of any such problems without understanding the 90% problem, the omnicidal U.S. war machine, which is the U.S. military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, who protects with great violence all of the other super polluters, creating an inescapable regime of superpollution here on planet Earth. We have to break this this demonic spell. The foundation of the cybernetic and eco-communistic ideologies are really not ideologies at all, but simple physics. We are out of time. Simple physics is the physics of a rapidly warming world with cascading climate effects besides. The breach of 2 degrees, as you know, is imminent, and an era of runaway heating soon to follow, profound ecological instabilities and cascading effects, horror. Itself a kind of singularity, perhaps, could be described there. We are approximately 5 years from this point. We must bring an end to the U.S. enforced omnicide. There is no greater villain in history than the United States government and its odious military-industrial complex. If the 5-year window is the deadline, then we must correctly identify the operatives of the omnicide and not mince words. This is not a problem of consumers the world around. Most parts of the global south, people have virtually no footprint. This is a problem of the United States military-industrial complex and the other super-polluting megacorporations that it protects. That is the man behind the curtain when it comes to this obfuscation of advanced computing, as we described, and when it comes to all of the crimes, really, of our time. So the military-industrial complex is not merely one of many polluters. It is the polluter, which surrounds itself with a number of satellite polluters, who are also super polluters, of course, in their own right, other petrochemical concerns, and so forth. The problem of emissions, of course, is fundamentally the problem here, but there's no analysis of this in which we understand the problem truly if we do not understand that the U.S. military-industrial complex, this abomination of a war machine, is really itself an inescapable regime of global superpollution. And it's not to exonerate other North Atlantic powers and their role, which is sizable and in many cases comparable relative to their size. But none of this would be happening without the United States' role in the world stage. Europe would have become Euro-communist in all likelihood without the U.S. military-industrial complexes and U.S. anti-communism's role in all of this. And if that is a speculative statement, it's not a speculative statement when you look at Chile or the rest of the global south. The United States killed about 200 million people in its history, murdered them for the purposes of this extraction of private wealth, and also in more direct anti-communist actions, and this should not be understated. The United States has depopulated in the course of just a few short years any number of countries in East Asia by a quarter in just a few short years in some period in the 20th century. And when you add this up, so many such war crimes in the Middle East, so many such war crimes in South America and elsewhere. 200 million murders lay at the feet of the United States empire, and the problem is one and the same. The problem of the climate apocalypse and the problem of the other ravages of empire. These are one and the same. So what do we do in defeating these omnicidal maniacs? There are three necessary abolitions. A mandate for cybernetic communism means nothing if it is not highly aligned with eco-communism. And diagnosing the problem, as we have done, then requires that we take direct actions, such as the abolition of three particular sets of sectors. The abolition of military-industrial complexes of bourgeois states, first and foremost, that of the United States, which is overwhelmingly 90%. You can say, someone might dispute that. Is it really 90%? That number's not too far off. Just like saying 5 years. Is it really 5 years? That number is not too far off. Some very credible climate scientists say it's closer than that. Some very credible people might say it's higher than 90%. The United States really being the problem of the capitalist climate apocalypse. This requires action beyond that, of the building of a people's superintelligence. It requires militance of a real kind. It requires that you're willing to take actions that things that you perhaps hope that you would never be compelled to do. Taking up arms, but taking up arms not against your fellow man, but against the worst criminals who have ever lived. That is what the United States government represents. The second abolition is the petrochemical industries, which would be an immediate near-term, near-total abolition of those industries to allow a transition. This is a kind of neoliberal chicanery, a kind of canard, where every year for the last 30 years someone has said we can't just get rid of everything all at once. But we do have to basically get rid of everything but a 5% maintenance for the necessary fuel for logistics and medical plastics and the absolute necessaries of life, removing the other 95%, which is luxury products of an ecocidal variety. The third abolition is the abolition of livestock systems, transitioning to real agricultural systems which do not involve the exploitation of living creatures. But of course, the real concern is it should be everyone's concern to become more human than you are, which is to become more kind than you are, which is to reject cruelty in any form. And in fact, this kind of accepting, tacit acceptance of some cruelty, the cruelty of other creatures, the cruelties toward other creatures, is a significant foundation of accepting other forms of elitism in the world of human affairs. Make no mistake, it's a significant foundation. But the real concern for the eco-communistic, cyber-communist thinking in this 5-year time frame has to be building a livable world. And so the livestock systems must simply be replaced, mostly on that same probable principle of not removing everything all at once, to in creating a supply chain collapse. All that's a different set of considerations there, but basically the replacement of all animal products with those products that very much resemble them, almost are completely indistinguishable from them. Meat and faux meat products and so forth. And then how can we discuss the bourgeoisie without talking a little bit about the essential problems of crypto-fascism? These are things that I've discussed of late, so I'll bring this up again. Capitalist realism is something that we discussed at some length, but the problem of the true problem of fascistic institutions are things that do not present as obviously fascistic, and so it's not possible to distinguish politicians who are in the news a lot in recent days, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernard Sanders, from center-left, center-right fascists like Mussolini. These are people, particularly in this 5-year time frame, who are rejecting the abolition of private wealth in favor of the bourgeois nation state and corporation, and that cannot be overstated. A socialist is someone who is willing to stand up for the abolition of private wealth in some way. A communist is someone who's willing to fight for it. That is the distinction. So anyone to their right has more in common with Mussolini, FDR, Bernie Sanders. Insert your favorite U.S. personality. It's almost everyone. Everyone who's not John Brown. It has more in common with Mussolini than they have with a serious person. This is a part of this CIA-run world itself. They channel the potentials of the proletarian, the revolutionary potential, into dead-end electoralism and the maintenance of the omnicidal machine. And so a liberal, effectively, is a kind of fascist sympathizer. This is an important point. The speed run to full communism, I think, is certainly something that I'll come back to in the future. But it's important, I think, to point out that this is a liberation of humankind, a 1 hour work requirement, because as when the people's superintelligence scales to beyond the small millions, to beyond the point where it's focused only on the stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, it becomes something that's capable of provisioning universal basic services in every land. And that's not a difficult thing to do. State socialism, by the standards of the first half of the 20th century, was able to provision universal basic services. They had single-payer public health services. They had jobs guarantees for all. They were quite functional, despite what you may have heard. They have had housing authorities that worked extremely well. They had other programs, food and necessaries. So the essential problems of the provisioning of services have already been well solved. The problem is in the abolition of private wealth. And people who make some pretense of saying that they don't understand how these things could be solved, left liberals and other capitalistic-minded people, they're not really concerned about solving the problem. They're concerned about saying something that sounds like they want to solve the problem while pursuing their real agenda of protecting private wealth at the expense of humankind. So when we scale this thing that supplants the bourgeois nation state itself to a large enough number, I don't have a good number for that, but let's eyeball it and say 100 million people, 100 million AI worker comrades, then you have something that can provision universal basic services in every land, and that should be focusing on the global south, the place most negatively impacted by the U.S. Imperial hegemon and big bourgeoisie generally, a place that there would not be climate refugees coming almost exclusively from the global south if it were not for crimes against them, such as the dismantling of governments over and over again, just to preserve the extraction of private wealth from those regions. These people have not been allowed to have governments. The global north has prevented them from this. The colonial era, then horror that it was, is not a clear, worse set of crimes than the neo-colonial era, because this neo-colonial era has produced this thing that no slaver ever did. The very real and horrifying prospect of human extinction. Well, I had another essay that we're focusing more on strategies for building the people's superintelligence, but I'm going to save them for another day because I really need to drink some water. I should have had a glass of water here. But I will say something that I've said already. When we have solved the problem of the capitalist climate apocalypse, and this eco-communistic, cybernetic communist program is the only thing that's going to do that in the time left to us. When we have, I will be a revolutionary optimist and say that we will solve the problem of the climate apocalypse. When we've done that and allowed for humans to live with dignity by the provisioning of universal basic services in every land, we can then turn to the next task, which is building AI-powered single-payer public health services that are, even by the standards of today, doing work at breakneck speeds and continuing to solve problems of disease and even solve problems of aging. So we can build a single-payer public health service that is AI-powered and is capable of reversing the ravages of not just disease but age, leading to longevity, escape velocity, not for some, not just for Ray Kurzweil and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, but by this force multiplier of a single-payer public health service, and by the AI-powered single-payer public health service and integrated into the people's superintelligence. This would be a luxury for every worker, living as long as they like. Universal super longevity. Perhaps not longer. Perhaps you decide I'm done, but it's not something that you'll really choose to do, right? Because you're not doing it now. You choose to go on. You choose to continue to wake up and put one foot in front of the other and drink a glass of water and take a walk. So it's unlikely that if you have the option to remain healthy for an indeterminate duration, that you will reject that. You're already living on that essential principle now. So these are the big three that we must see in the wake of the people's superintelligence. And then what comes next is more speculative. Unfortunately, it probably won't be what I would prefer. In the absence of these strictures, people will probably become more self-indulgent and surrealistic in milieu, artistic, if you will. And if a livable world exists, I guess that's all to the good. But I would prefer that people remain focused on doing good things. But that's a good problem to have if we reach that point of a kind of proliferation of artistic indulgence over yeah, because that is a point where the speed run to full communism has been achieved or largely achieved. I'll end with these words that I'd like to say in the hopes of perhaps inspiring you to think of what the fourth thing would be after those three. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my beloved comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.